Google stood apart from its rivals in its success in adding many other categories of personal information to its centralized collections. As individuals spent more and more time online, records of what they did and what they thought were created automatically, and Google happily offered to serve as the single home for all of it. If a single user were to fully utilize all of Google's services, the amount of sensitive personal information that would end up residing on Google's servers exceeded what Microsoft had envisioned for Hailstorm. Yet, as Google expanded, it did not face a firestorm of protest about what it was storing after the initial fuss about Gmail passed. Google's ability to proceed unimpeded without drawing public ire is partly explained by the fact that Google's newest personal information services were dwarfed by much more successful offerings from its competitors. Google Checkout, a service that stored a user's credit card number to be quickly tapped when shopping online, was unable to take much market share away from eBay's PayPal, another online payment system. Google's Orkut was an extremely popular networking site in some places in the world, but not in the United States. Even Gmail, the service that had gained the highest visibility of any of Google's newer offerings, was in a distant fourth place among web-hosted email providers 3 years after its introduction. Google's expansion was also helped by the cultural shift toward much freer public display of personal information on the social networking sites. Intimate disclosure became routine on MySpace and Facebook, and reached its natural apotheosis at newer live video sites, such as Justin.tv, where everyone was invited to Lifecast, treating one's daily life as entertainment suited for broadcast, to the world via the internet, unedited, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Even if the number of Lifecasters remained small and their average age skewed young, their mere existence was a leading indicator of the spreading acceptance of private lives being made public. John Battelle, an entrepreneurial publisher and longtime observer of Google, who in 2005 had written a book about the company, The Search, was one of the few who raised concerns that Google users were granting a single organization control over too much data. In June 2007, Battelle said in a blog post that he had reached what he called his Google saturation point and was no longer willing to let too much of my online life run through any one control point, regardless of who it is. He decided deliberately not to use Google Calendar and Google Spreadsheets for some business planning because he didn't want Google to have access to information about his publishing business. What exactly Google would do with the information, he self-mockingly put the company's name within quotation marks, making fun of his own implied notion that the corporation would act as if it were a person, he did not say, and attributed his concern to some primal lizard brain fear of giving too much control of my data to one source. Google's Matt Cutts saw Battelle's post and added his own comments, which were supposed to be reassuring. Given Google's strict privacy policies, I wouldn't worry about something like using Google Calendar or Gmail. Cutts said he would make inquiries within Google and try to get a colleague to talk at length about the policies that the company had in place to protect personal data. But "don't worry" was not much of a response. Battelle revisited Google's terms of service that its users must accept and found language that was anything but reassuring to a business that was competing in any way against Google. By submitting, posting, or displaying the content, you give Google a perpetual, irrevocable, worldwide, royalty-free, and non-exclusive license to reproduce, adapt, modify, translate, publish, publicly perform, publicly display, and distribute any content which you submit, post, or display on or through the services. Google also reserved the right to use personal information for auditing, research, and analysis to operate and improve Google technologies and services. Yet the chief concern now expressed by Google's user wasn't that someone at Google might take a peek at their personal data. It was that Google might be sloppy and not take good care of their data. In February 2007, Larry Dignan, a columnist for ZDNet, addressed this concern. "Will you trust Google with your data?" he asked, and answered no. Speaking as a business person, he reasoned that if Google were to lose a company's data, it might not treat the incident with due seriousness, because Google disclaimed any liability for damages beyond the subscription fee. This amounted to no liability if the service was offered for free. Dignan said he spoke as someone who had watched hosted data disappear permanently and had learned the importance of selecting a data keeper carefully. He suggested that corporate data would be safer in the hands of a software company like Salesforce.com, whose entire business was software as a service and whose very existence depended upon maintaining a sterling reputation for reliability. As large and seemingly successful a company as Google appeared to be, it remained an unknown to those who ran the information technology departments in large companies and government organizations. Its dominance in the world of web search did not impress technologists, whose concerns centered on Google's ability to have its Google's apps running and available to its customers 99.9% of the time, as it promised. They also wanted to see convincing evidence that Google's systems could handle the increased load of Google apps without accidental data losses. Google's strategic vision of moving all computer users to the cloud would remain unrealized unless it devised a way to gain the trust of customers. It needed lots of customers to show that Google Apps scaled, but until it could demonstrate that the new service scaled, corporate customers would not be willing to sign up. The only way it could win over customers, at least initially, would be by giving the software away for free, and yet do so in a way that did not undermine its ability to charge customers later. Google Apps managers realized that college and university campuses were the ideal place to give Google Apps services away, with student populations that would be large enough to demonstrate that the service scaled well. Google Apps Education Edition would be offered to campuses without charge and free of advertising, which gave it the opportunity to extend the Google brand without being accused of seeking immediate financial gain. A Google Apps Premier Edition would be sold on a subscription basis to corporations, which would be charged $50 annually for each user. In October 2006, Arizona State University was the first major campus to roll out Google Apps Education Edition for its 65,000 students. In the year that followed, many other universities tested the service, but adoptions by entire institutions came slowly. In the meantime, Google experienced for the first time the problem that the Gmail team members had lain awake at night worrying about when they had first conceived of putting Gmail on Google's unreliable hardware: permanent loss of all Gmail messages for a handful of its users. The possibility had been anticipated and safeguards were supposed to make sure that it could not ever possibly happen. But in December 2006, some Gmail users began posting an incredible story. They had logged onto their accounts and found that everything, inbox mail, sent messages, contacts, had disappeared. The story was followed closely at TechCrunch, but Google was fortunate that it did not receive wide coverage in the print media. The company sent TechCrunch a note that acknowledged that a small number of our users, around 60, had lost all of their email messages, but it did not explain what had gone awry. It offered only bland corporate speak. We know how important Gmail is to our users, and vague claims about extensive safeguards that guaranteed that this is a small and isolated incident. The incident did not have major repercussions, but only because prospective customers were not interested enough in Google Apps to bother to notice. Progress selling the Premier Edition to corporate customers came even more slowly than giving away the Education Edition to higher education. In the first quarter of 2007, Google collected only $37 million from sales of software licenses, less than 1% of its quarterly revenue, and much less than 1% of the $4.8 billion in revenues that Microsoft's business division, which included Microsoft Office, reported for the quarter. Nevertheless, Microsoft treated Google Apps as a potent threat to the core of its existing business and would not permit Google to use giveaways to higher education uncontested. Significantly, Microsoft decided to battle Google online and offer web-based email and chat to colleges and universities for free. It was not fully comparable to Google's package. Microsoft's lacked online word processing and spreadsheet capabilities, and also lacked a calendar. But Microsoft's entry provided campuses with a real choice, free email and a suite of software equivalent to Office from Google, or free email software from Microsoft, in a new program that Microsoft gave the awful name of Windows Live at EDU. Not as bad as Hailstorm, but bad enough to be an embarrassment. With its long history of working with campuses, Microsoft had an insider's advantage over Google. It also could compete effectively with Google without matching the various Office-like applications that Google provided, because campus administrators were interested in email and not much else. Students had always paid for their own software applications like Office. Whether they continued to do so, or were spared doing so by adopting Google's online software as a service, was not a concern of the administrators. Microsoft quickly signed up campuses in 15 countries that were willing to try the service. One notable trophy gained in the spring of 2007 was the University of Pennsylvania, whose School of Arts and Sciences, and also its business school, Wharton, concluded a long evaluation process for adopting a new email system that had begun a year before, and culminated with the selection of Microsoft over Google. One of the criteria that university officials used when looking at the competing offerings was the company's commitment to protecting the privacy of student information. Both Google and Microsoft scored poorly. Both conceded that they might turn over to government officials information such as users' search histories or browsing patterns if the government requested. A student advisory board recommended that Penn adopt Google Apps, but negotiations with Google foundered. Microsoft then walked off with the prize. In April 2007, Google and Microsoft had the opportunity to make their pitch for web-hosted email to the country's largest university system, the California State University, which had 417,000 students spread across 23 campuses. The university's information technology managers, with one outsider, me, gathered in a hotel meeting room in Los Angeles to hear Jeff Keltner, representing Google, and Walter Harp, representing Microsoft, do their best to sell to a tough crowd that arrived without showing signs of being ready to embrace web-based email systems for their campuses. Keltner and Harp were both in their 30s. Both had graduated from Stanford, and both realized that before they could compete against each other, they had to first convince their audience that hosted email, managed on servers beyond the campus, offered compelling benefits to their institutions. Yahoo had also been invited to participate and had agreed to send a representative, but at the last minute canceled. Google's Keltner had the opportunity to speak first. Google, he said, viewed its free Google Apps, with its special ad-free version of Gmail for students, as a way of giving something back to universities. University information technology departments had become burdened managing their own email systems based on Microsoft's Exchange server or similar software. These were expensive to maintain and back up, susceptible to viruses, and prone to fail. Only by historical accident had universities ended up in the email business. He said, "For almost none of you is running a scalable, reliable, redundant, secure infrastructure to run massively parallel collaboration activities really a core process. Let Google handle it. And you can return to the educational technology that you know best how to provide." Keltner reassured the administrators that the email, documents, and other data managed by Google Apps would be absolutely safe, because data was copied to at least 3 servers, creating multiple backup copies. He did not mention the problem of lost Gmail a few months earlier, and the administrators had apparently not heard of the incident. He was about to continue with his spiel when I raised my hand and asked him, how was it possible for Google's backup systems to have failed the previous December, resulting in the loss of everything that the 60 Gmail users had stored? "Good question," Keltner said, whose normally fast-paced delivery slowed as he paused and gathered his thoughts. "We haven't talked a lot, publicly, about what exactly happened in December." He stalled for time with more flattery. Very astute observation. He granted that email had been lost for about 60 users, which was literally about 1 in a million. And it was the sort of loss that happens everywhere in the computer world. It was not a failure of any hardware, it was a failure of the brain. Regrettably, somebody at Google hit the delete button when they shouldn't have hit delete. Microsoft's Walter Harp did not talk about Microsoft Exchange and the benefits of using campus-based computing resources to handle email. Instead, he emphasized Microsoft's experience handling web-based email, which far exceeded that of Google's. Not only did MSN Hotmail have 233 million users worldwide, compared to Gmail's 62 million, but also Microsoft had experience hosting corporate email for Quest, Verizon, and telecommunication giants around the world. "We don't make it into the press all the time," he said. "We're not a shiny new object. For some people, we're the evil empire. The point being is, we're quietly doing quite well." The administrators in the room were most concerned with the inherent problem of hosted services. Messages and documents are irretrievable when systems go down. Earlier that week, BlackBerry's service had failed globally, and many BlackBerry users could not get their email for 14 hours. Someone in the audience asked the two representatives, "If things do fail at Microsoft or Google Mail, are we failing with the rest of the world, or are we just failing in the education environment?" The two companies gave similar answers. Their education customers were not segregated. As Harp explained, "There's strength in numbers here because you are failing with the rest of the world." Google's Keltner added, "The answer from us is much the same. If you're down, somebody at the Googleplex is down. That sets off a lot of alarms." The representatives for Google and Microsoft had their sharpest exchange when Microsoft was asked about extending its education program to faculty and staff members, as well as students, as Google had done. "Web-based software would be a letdown," Harp said, "for a high-intensity productivity worker. If he himself were forced to use either Google's or Microsoft's web-based calendar service, I'd be pretty upset about it." This offered the chance for Google's Keltner to pounce. Everything that Google was offering to campuses was used by Googlers themselves. He said, "This is where my email is. It's a Gmail account. It's where my calendar is. All of our corporate calendar is Google Calendar. We absolutely believe this is ready for the enterprise." An old expression in the software industry, "eating your own dog food," embodied the notion that a company should never offer software that it wasn't willing to rely upon itself. In the 1980s and 1990s, Microsoft upheld and practiced eating your own dog food, but for web-hosted services, clearly it was Google, not Microsoft, that was committed to using its own products for its own internal needs. Harp was not an automation, spouting the official party line of Microsoft. In fact, he was refreshingly candid and left the best impression when he declined to criticize Google for matching ads to email contents in the regular version of Gmail. I asked him whether Microsoft scanned the contents of Hotmail messages, and he answered yes. The email is scanned to prepare an index for the users searching, but was not scanned for the purpose of selling advertisements. Then he said, "Honestly, my personal opinion is I don't have a problem with that myself. I think it's neat. We can do a lot of cool stuff with that." For example, he said, "The software could detect a FedEx tracking number in an email message and then automatically show the user where the package was." This was merely a hypothetical use, he said, and the company had no plans to use scanning to add services. Still, unvoiced concern about scanning seemed to linger. Google's Keltner knew from his own experience that the very word scanning was encumbered with negative connotations. 3 years after Gmail's introduction, Keltner felt compelled to explain, once again, that scanning of email was a necessity. Scanning simply meant that a machine read the contents of messages, which it had to do in order to detect spam or viruses. Talking about the topic of scanning upset him to the point that he almost lost his composure. Anybody who says they don't scan your email, point blank, they're lying. The day of presentations to California State University representatives ended anticlimactically. The administrators dispersed and no campus followed up with an immediate decision to use Google Apps. The next fall, Google could point to the University of Phoenix as its largest partner in education, 250,000 accounts for students, faculty, and staff. But it still had too few customers to be willing to talk about the aggregate number of student accounts other than to say that it was in the hundreds of thousands. Microsoft, however, happily provided specifics, claiming 6 million active accounts used by students, faculty, and alumni within 3 years of the 2005 introduction of Windows Live at EDU. As time passed after the Google versus Microsoft meeting in Los Angeles in April 2007, Jeff Keltner's instinct that Google's competitors and critics would continue to dwell on the scanning issue turned out to be well justified. Microsoft's Walter Harp had taken the high road, refusing to use scanning to give Microsoft an advantage over Google. But Harp's ultimate boss, Steve Ballmer, did not have scruples about misstating what the competition did. In October 2007, he casually dropped a remark at a conference in the United Kingdom that was a new variation on the old falsehood, and one that was far more sinister than anything that had come before. At Google, Ballmer said, "They read your mail, and we don't." The audience murmured and laughed nervously, and Ballmer paused for a moment to let the commotion subside. He resumed, "That's just a factual statement. It's not even meant to be pejorative." Ballmer had it exactly wrong. His was not a factual statement, and he most certainly meant it in a pejorative way. In fact, software analyzed the contents of each email message at Microsoft's MSN Hotmail, just as Harp had explained, even though Microsoft did not do as much with the information extracted from the scan as it could have. More egregious than Ballmer's pretending that email hosted by his own company was never scrutinized was his use of the pronoun they as the ones who read the email at Google. Without a clarifying antecedent, the they left the impression that it was humans that were doing the reading of Gmail messages. With a seemingly offhand remark consisting of just those 7 words, "They read your email and we don't," Ballmer conjured the most frightening images that could be imagined and attached them to Google. What was perhaps most interesting about Ballmer's comment was that he felt the need to strike out at Google, a company that had not won over significant numbers of customers for the software that competed against Microsoft's. Ballmer was not concerned about Google's inroads to date into Microsoft's core software business, but he was unmistakably concerned with Google's ability in the future to make cloud computing into a popular replacement for Microsoft's desktop software. Microsoft understands that in the long term, local computing on desktop machines and in-house email servers will be replaced by cloud computing. As can be seen in its marketing of web-based email to higher education customers, it has abandoned any hope of being able to sell the merits of software that is sold in packages when facing competition from the cloud. It is trying to reinvent itself as a software-as-a-service company itself, ready to greet the future. Microsoft's on-off-on bids for Yahoo in 2008 were an expression of the company's rather desperate wish to better meet the competitive challenge posed by Google by moving the place of battle from Microsoft's home ground, Office applications, to Google's home ground, web search and advertising. In May, when lack of agreement between the two companies about Yahoo's valuation led Microsoft to withdraw its offer, Microsoft changed tactics. But no one doubted that its most pressing strategic challenge remained Google. As Microsoft devotes more attention, and more of its treasury, to its online businesses, no major software company will remain to defend the notion that personal data should remain physically close to the individual and scattered among different media and devices. Centralization of data seems inexorable, and as it proceeds, the concerns about protecting individual privacy seem likely to diminish. A parallel might be drawn to the transition in America's cities in the 1880s, when the generation of electrical power, based on alternating current, was centralized in large power plants where electricity could be produced at much less cost, replacing the earliest small plants, based on direct current, that were located on the premises of hotels, office buildings, and the homes of wealthy individuals. Centralization of power generation brought the need to transport electricity considerable distances, and electrocution became a risk for passers-by as well as for electricians, as power lines filled the cityscape. Critics sounded alarms about the dangers, but the advantages of inexpensive electricity were too great to be ignored, even though accidental electrocutions were a frequent occurrence. Centralized power generation became so well accepted that later generations of Americans were not aware that the local mode of power generation had preceded it. In the same way, centralized computing may become ubiquitous, despite occasional data losses, the computer age's equivalent of accidental electrocutions, and later generations will not realize that there ever was a time when data was not stored at a centralized location in the cloud. The technical advantages of moving to the cloud are clear, but the transition will be slowed by legal considerations that large corporations must weigh before they unplug their in-house servers. Unlike individuals and universities providing students with email accounts, a corporation must, by law, preserve and manage every email message and every internal document, maintaining absolute confidence in its ability to protect confidentiality and yet be able to retrieve whatever materials a judge may demand in the future. Compliance with the law is manageable when one uses one's own servers. Relying instead entirely on Google Apps in the cloud has yet to be tried, let alone sanctioned. In May 2008, David Berland, an Information Week blogger, told his readership of corporate IT administrators, "Yes, it's time to destroy your email servers. What app is next?" Based on his experience administering Gmail for his organization, he listed many reasons why Gmail was ready to replace the Microsoft and IBM email systems used within large enterprises. Or, he grudgingly added, Gmail was almost ready. The beta label that was still attached to the Gmail logo was a sign that the provider was not fully confident in the reliability and maturity of the service. Google could take its time working on Gmail, preparing for the day when it could comfortably remove the beta qualifier. University students would supply a flow of customers who could stress test the system and also help to test out the other Google apps that were a cloud-based alternative to Microsoft Office. Strategically speaking, Google was in a most desirable position, a company that was old enough and large enough to be ready to benefit more than anyone else whenever the shift to the cloud gathered momentum. But it was not so old and so large that it had a legacy terrestrial business supplying software to organizations in-house that would disappear. Google could greet the future in the cloud as its own. Chapter 8. Algorithm, Meet Humanity. Most of corporate America develops new products stealthily. Many ideas will be tested out of public view, most will be found wanting in some significant way, and few will actually emerge from the lab. The experiments that end in failure remain unknown, the company's private business. Google is not so reticent, however. It, too, has many projects underway that will never see light. But the company is far more willing than its counterparts to do much of its experimentation out in the open, in the marketplace. Instead of convening focus groups to gather initial impressions from prospective customers before a product's introduction, Google goes ahead and releases the product, affixing the beta label to warn users that the product lacks important features, and turns the general public into a focus group. Google's reputation has not suffered. On the contrary, the company enjoys a public image that associates its brand with experimentation and innovation. Google does not have to release fully finished products. The public credits it as an inspirational achiever for merely trying out new things at a frenetic pace that its rivals cannot match. But the public's attachment to Google's culture of innovation celebrates the birth of new Google products and neglects the need for incremental improvement of older ones. Googlers themselves worry, at times, that the company has moved too fast to attend properly to making its newest offerings truly great ones. At one of Google's Friday meetings that I attended in 2007, a young woman asked Larry Page a pointed question. "We seem to be introducing a lot of products like the docs, spreadsheets, and presenting, and so on. If we're introducing those kinds of products, don't you think that they should offer more than what's already existing out there? And should we sort of complete packages? Because they seem to be still sort of rudimentary and not fully formed." She wondered if they were purposely designed without essential features in order to make it easier for skittish users to try the software. Her voice trailed off mid-sentence. "I think that's a fair criticism," Page said. The question that Google has always wrestled with when readying new services is whether to wait until each is fully baked. It has been company policy to release products before they were polished, in order to get early feedback. If they were released in an overly buggy state, however, users would simply walk away. Page said that all of the products that she had mentioned were experiencing rapid growth, which suggested that they were fulfilling unmet needs, whatever their current shortcomings. The rapid growth in Google Apps that he offered as exculpation began with a baseline of 0. Any growth at all would appear rapid. He left important questions unanswered. How might Google's brand be tarnished by its offering Google Apps that were incomplete? Was its pursuit of personal information a strategic distraction, impeding its ability to stay ahead of the pack in search and catch up with the leaders in social networking? Was its internal culture, which lavished rewards and praise on those who conceived entirely new projects, leaving too few people to do the less glamorous work of incremental improvements needed for second, third, or fourth versions of its products? The little-known Google Answers service is an example of a promising experiment that suffered from neglect. In 2002, Google offered users the opportunity to pose questions that would be answered by Google Answers researchers, independent contractors who had been screened and certified by Google employees as experts at locating hard-to-find information on the web. The service charged customers a fee for each question answered, a radical departure from the advertising-based revenue model Google was using for its core search service. The amount a customer paid varied. Customers determined for themselves the amount they were willing to pay when they submitted their questions. Google did not attempt to guarantee an answer in all cases. Only if the amount offered for an answer was sufficiently high to attract the interest of one of Google's contractors would an answer be supplied. Google retained 1/4 of the fee collected by Google Answers, and the contractor received the remainder. This also was a curious departure for Google, because the service did not rely on sophisticated algorithms, but rather on human researchers. It was a service that would not scale, at least not quickly, in the hypothetical case that its customer base grew quickly. Once Google unveiled the service, Google's managers gave it little thought. Despite its failing to attract customers, no one at Google bothered to tinker with the format or considered rethinking the business model. In 2005, 3 years after Google Answers was launched, Yahoo saw the opportunity created by Google's neglect and unveiled its own service, Yahoo Answers. It was a non-commercial service. Anyone could submit a question for free, and anyone who wished could supply an answer, though no compensation was paid. The lack of remuneration was not a problem, however. Yahoo's volunteer researchers competed for the approbation of users, who rated the quality of the answers. Within a year, Yahoo Answers was pulling in about 14 million users monthly and had built up a database of more than 60 million answers, which were made available to all of its users. Despite Google's 3-year head start, Yahoo had raced far ahead of Google. In late 2006, Google decided to pull the plug on its own answers. Closing the business was momentarily embarrassing, but not a significant blow to Google's overall revenue growth. But it did reveal a weakness at Google. The company did not know how to go about tapping the knowledge of strangers whose collective contributions were defining a new generation of online services, Web 2.0. The success of Yahoo Answers came about because Yahoo enlisted the contributions of users who enjoyed the online company of others and regarded the group's voluntary association as a community. Yahoo understood before Google how important virtual online communities were to many people. Not only did Google fail to give consistent attention to products after they had been released, it also neglected work on bringing its disparate collections of new types of information, such as books, scholarly journals, maps, and videos, together so that a single search could rummage through all of its new information silos, in addition to its database of web pages. Users could, of course, go to the various Google sites and do separate searches, but the sites had been developed separately, in haste, before Google could figure out how to make all of them accessible in a single search. Even when Google had only a few collections of information other than web pages, its product managers understood that without universal search, users were not likely to go to the trouble of searching here and there to find all of the information that Google had to offer. Either they would not think to look anywhere but on Google's homepage, or they would find visiting the various sites too time-consuming. In 2001, David Bailey, a young Google engineer, did a few mock-ups of sample screens to show what integrated search results might look like. Britney Spears was called up to illustrate how news and images could be tapped in addition to web pages, but universal search was left on a list of desiderata. Between 2001 and 2006, several other Google engineers briefly took on universal search as a project, but they lost interest before making progress. In Google's internal culture, engineers decide what projects are of greatest personal interest. Without champions, ideas for worthy projects sit on a shelf and gather dust. Universal search was one of those. In 2006, Bailey returned to it with what he called an inner fire to see the project through. It took about a year for him and his team to build the code that allowed a single search to extend to more than one silo. The universal search algorithm had to determine whether the other kinds of information were of equally high quality as the top web page result, which entailed developing more sophisticated software than that used for web pages alone. The greater the variety of material, the greater the possibility that the software would make erroneous deductions. A search for Kentucky Fried Chicken on the web would lead to the restaurant chain, but when the same search phrase was submitted to Google Maps, would the algorithm know that this was not a request only for restaurants located in Kentucky? The software should be smart enough to sense that when a search term like Wichita tornado was submitted, what the searcher most wanted to see was not perfect matches on web pages, which had been crawled weeks before, but rather news stories about a tornado that had just hit Wichita a few minutes earlier. A crucial clue that the news angle was most important would be the fact that in the previous 5 minutes, more people had searched for that phrase than had done so in the entire year. In May 2007, Google was ready to announce a limited version of universal search. The search results that users now saw were changed only subtly. Only a few non-web items were added to the first page of search results. Google moved with deliberate slowness, not wanting to introduce ill-chosen items that would hurt the company's reputation for trustworthy search results. For all of its innovation in new areas of information, Google remained deeply conservative in its attachment to the same basic methods that it had used for web search since the time of its founding, and it was extremely reluctant to adopt new methodologies. While Google clung tightly to its faith that analyzing links was the best way to sort the quality of web pages, startups saw an opportunity to move beyond link analysis and develop software that organized online information by what it could understand of its actual meaning, moving well beyond word matching. Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the World Wide Web, has proselytized for the creation of a successor to the web, the semantic web, in which web pages would contain code that would facilitate machine understanding of the contents of each page. His vision, which would require tremendous work on the part of every website editor, may never be realized. But in the meantime, new companies are springing up, like PowerSet, MetaWeb, and Radar Networks, to improvise new techniques for searching information on the basis of meaning extracted by software, even without the help of embedded code. In May 2008, PowerSet made its first public appearance, initially searching only Wikipedia, not the entire web. As a demonstration of proof of concept, it was quite successful. Only 2 months later, Microsoft announced it would acquire the company. Google's dominance in the search business has not scared off entrepreneurs and venture capitalist backers. Between 2004 and 2006, no less than $350 million was invested in new companies that planned to pursue some aspect of Internet search. Some of the challengers are attempting to write a superior search algorithm, but others have abandoned altogether the quest for a better algorithm and look to an entirely different source for improved search results. They have turned to the approach that Yahoo used, pre-Google, at the very beginning of web search: humans. No one ever doubted the ability of humans to distinguish good web pages from bad. The problem was that the web had grown faster than Yahoo had been able to add editors to keep its web directory current. This created the perfect opportunity for Google to supply an automated method of evaluating the quality of pages. The difference between 1997, the last year of the pre-Google era, and 2007 was that 10 years later, no one in the search business was trying to do as Yahoo had done, hire as many experts as needed to organize the web. Instead, every other search startup, it seemed, was attempting to do as Wikipedia had done, harness the contributions of volunteers. A new phrase was coined, social search, to refer to this new category of search service, which relied not upon an engine powered by algorithms, but upon the collective judgments of the group. Anyone willing to recommend websites that matched a particular search phrase was invited to do so. Squidoo, Spruce, and Nosy Joe prepared search results based on the assumed wisdom of crowds. Another little startup, Best, welcomed submissions from anyone but reviewed them before making them available. In December 2006, Jimmy Wales, the founder of Wikipedia, announced plans to introduce a search service modeled after Wikipedia to directly compete with Google. In many cases, he said, Google produces nothing but spam and useless crap. The spam he referred to was web pages that used deceptive means to pull in unwitting visitors who generated revenue for the website, which was paid by advertisers based on the number of visitors that viewed the site's advertisements, willing or not. The most basic task of a search engine is to make a qualitative decision, he said, determining this page is good, this page sucks. Algorithmic search has to make a guess using roundabout means. A human can tell with just a glance. He was confident that he could enlist a network of contributors to make those judgments, just as he had done with Wikipedia. Mahalo, another challenger to Google, was started in 2007 and received funding from Sequoia Capital. Mahalo claimed, extravagantly, that it was the world's first human-powered search engine. Its founder, Jason Calacanis, shared Wales' disgust with search results served up on Google that were infected with spam. He, too, emphasized that a human editor could produce spam-free results. Mahalo began with about 30 editors. Rather than attempting to match the comprehensiveness of Google's search index, Calacanis chose instead to have his staff prepare results for the search phrases that were most frequently submitted to Google. They began by winnowing Google's top search results to create spam-free lists of what they judged to be the best web links by topic. Within a few months, they had prepared results for 5,000 terms. Soon, they were also vetting submissions from users, who were paid $10 to $15 per topic for results pages that were accepted. When Mahalo served up a list of links, a visitor benefited from what Calacanis described as basically your own personal research assistant doing 4 to 10 hours of research on your search query. A hand-built Mahalo page organized links under subthemes that speeded scanning. The page on global warming, for example, had clusters of links under recent news stories, background articles, science and data, groups advocating action, groups arguing against, and other headings, including climate change humor, with videos that included online snippets of Stephen Colbert, Will Ferrell, South Park, and The Simpsons. Each link required only a single line, so the Mahalo Global Warming page easily accommodated 85 hand-picked sites, far more than the 15 that Google serves up on its usual first page of results. Mahalo was able to ride on top of Google's algorithms. When Google made improvements, Mahalo contributors and editors, who used Google searches to compose their lists of choice selections, benefited too. Calacanis described Mahalo as a melding of human capabilities with those of the machine. John Henry and the steam hammer versus the steam hammer alone. Googlers were irked, however, by Calacanis' comparison of Google's search engine to the steam hammer, cold, mechanical, devoid of the human touch. As social search became more and more visible in 2007, the company's emissaries tried to humanize the algorithm. In June, Marissa Mayer was in Paris for the company's European Press Day and did her best to place a human face on Google's core technologies. The opportunity appeared when she was asked by a British reporter why Google often prominently featured links to Wikipedia articles without checking on the reliability of the information to be found in them. She began her answer along the old groove, stressing the value of the objectivity of an automated selection process. Rather than trying to make individualized judgments about particular sources, like Wikipedia, she said, we rely on automated methods, like a long page rank. She took pains, though, to point out that website editors made the crucial choices in placing links to the sites that they valued most, sending the signals that Google's search engine processed. Wikipedia placed highly only because people liked the content. In her rendering, the Google algorithm was a populist instrument of the people. Little Mahalo was hardly of a size that would make Google tremble. Yet Google did take seriously the competitive threat posed by a combination of machine algorithm and human intelligence, especially if deployed by a large rival. For an article I was preparing in June 2007 about Mahalo, I interviewed Matt Cutts, the head of Google's web spam team, to obtain Google's official response to Mahalo's reliance on human editors. Cutts had nothing disparaging to say about Mahalo. He emphasized Google's own interest in considering new approaches to search, too. I don't think we're ideologically bound to only computers, only algorithms, he said. The company had already taken the trouble to remove all references to automatic ranking in every one of its own Google help pages. The editorial changes cleared the way for experimenting later that year with a search page that allowed its users to vote on search results, just as Diggs's users vote on news stories. Cutts shared extended thoughts on the subject in a post on his personal blog titled "The Role of Humans in Google Search." After noting that all opinions that would follow were his own, not Google's, he said that his view was that Google was perfectly amenable to social search, personalized search, or any means of using human feedback to improve search quality. He noted that he had publicly expressed the same points the previous fall, welcoming more human input into search at Google, with the reservation that attention had to be paid to potential abuse by bad actors, a problem he confronted daily in his battles with web spam. He also mentioned that Larry Page had publicly expressed Google's willingness to consider alternatives to the algorithm. Page had appeared in the midst of Jason Calacanis and a small group of fellow conferees at Foo Camp, an informal techie conference, and had remarked, in Calacanis' paraphrasing, that search engines were best for finding information, but when it came to organizing information, Wikipedia found a better way. Cutts, Mayer, Page, all were roving ambassadors for Google, telling the public that Google was not a frozen monolith. Indeed, the company was detaching from the algorithm, becoming more flexible and attentive to the wisdom of the crowd, albeit slowly. Credible rumors of its interest in acquiring Digg, the social news site, swirled in 2007 and again in 2008. The notion that Google would permit users to determine the placement of items on a page was beginning to seem not just possible, but likely. Still, the algorithm remained Google's area of greatest competence. Software, which could analyze text with ease, did not perform as well, however, when applied to the task of closely analyzing video. In 2007, after its YouTube acquisition, Google was slow to develop an algorithm for defining a video's fingerprint, a pattern that would serve as a unique identifier. Without video fingerprints, Google would not be able to reliably automate the identification and removal of copyrighted material in videos that were uploaded to YouTube. In January 2007, Eric Schmidt pointed to Google's development work on audio and video fingerprinting as evidence of how very concerned the company was about respecting copyright ownership, and said that the fingerprinting technology that it was developing was in various stages of being rolled out. Even as it was promising the imminent release of a technical solution to the problem of copyright infringement, Google was also arguing that it did not need to release anything, that it was in full compliance with the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. The law did not require it to block the uploading of videos that infringed copyright, only that it remove videos whenever copyright holders brought to its attention instances of copyright violations. Google did not show any sympathy to copyright holders like Viacom that had to assign a team of employees to pore through YouTube videos looking for unauthorized clips, sending takedown requests to YouTube, then repeating the same cycle endlessly as the clips reappeared almost as soon as YouTube removed them. In February 2007, Viacom submitted to YouTube a batch of more than 100,000 takedown requests. At this point, Google could have made a conciliatory gesture, saying, "We see the problem. It's admittedly a serious one. We have our best technical team at work on video fingerprinting, which has long been one of the most difficult standing problems in computer science. We are hopeful that we'll have technology ready soon." Instead, Google chose a more combative course, complying with Viacom's takedown requests, but gratuitously adding derision, characterizing the requests as evidence that Viacom executives were too dense to understand that YouTube's hosting of their clips drew new audiences to Viacom's television programs, and ultimately served Viacom's interests too. Viacom did not buy Google's argument. The expected lawsuit arrived in March 2007, when Viacom went to court seeking at least $1 billion in damages from YouTube and Google for copyright infringement. The suit argued that YouTube actively monitored uploads and removed pornographic videos, but declined to do the same for Viacom's copyrighted programs. Viacom did not take Google to task for failing to deliver the video fingerprinting technology that it had promised. Instead, it pointed out that Google had not even bothered to automate a simple comparison of the text in the tags that users appended to videos or in the searches that users submitted with a database of show titles and the names of characters of television shows and movies. Viacom asked not for perfection, but simply exercising care, which, it said, is not a Herculean task. Google responded to the lawsuit by retreating to its interpretation of the law, which was that copyright owners did all the monitoring, and Google's sole responsibility was to respond to the requests of the copyright owners. Eric Schmidt characterized the lawsuit as a form of business negotiation in the media industry, where, he said, one could be expected to be sued to death. By poking fun at Viacom's lawsuit as a negotiating stunt, Schmidt directed attention away from Google's failure to introduce software that would automatically identify and remove material that infringed copyright. A few months later, he announced at the National Association of Broadcasters meeting in Las Vegas that Google was very close to turning on a new service, Claim Your Content, that would somewhat automate the submission of requests to remove copyright-infringing videos. The new technology, he said, is not a filtering system. Rather, it was software that would come into play after the video was uploaded, looking for unauthorized copies of videos protected by copyright, and deleting them if the copyright owner directed Google to do so. Months passed, and no sign of Claim Your Content appeared. The National Legal and Policy Center, a conservative public interest group based in Washington, D.C., made Google's lax policing of copyright infringers on YouTube and Google Video an issue of public interest and uncovered embarrassing data. Random spot checks identified over 300 full-length copyrighted movies that were available on Google Video. Google Video also ran advertisements placed by video pirate websites, such as millionmoviesdownload.com. Other video websites had introduced video filtering technologies, but not Google. Ken Boehm, the center's co-founder, wrote Senator Patrick J. Leahy expressing puzzlement that a company that has been largely successful in its endeavors to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful has apparently been unable to implement a working filtering technology to identify copyrighted content in a timely fashion. Philippe Dauman, Viacom's CEO, sounded the same theme in October 2007, when Google finally released what it had decided to call the YouTube Video Identification Beta, 6 months after the company had said it was very close to releasing it. The timing was also curious because it came just 2 days before a consortium of content providers and internet companies, including, besides Viacom, Walt Disney, Microsoft, NBC Universal, CBS, Fox, MySpace, and Dailymotion, announced an industry-wide copyright protection initiative in which Google had chosen not to participate. Dauman dryly remarked, Google is a very high-quality company with a lot of very, very smart people. They can do things very quickly when they want to. I guess they haven't wanted to until this point. Whether Google could have moved more quickly or not, the company could hardly be surprised that its vaunted expertise in developing the most successful algorithms in the search industry would naturally lead to the expectation that it could produce industry-leading algorithms in other areas, were it genuinely interested in doing so. The criticism that Google was deliberately holding back video fingerprinting technology seems unfounded. The evidence suggests the opposite. Google seems to have released its own video identification technology hastily, as if its executives could not stand to be embarrassed by another day of delay. YouTube was able to test the new software for only 1 week prior to its release, using videos supplied by only one partner. The system had found a grand total of only 18 pirated clips on all of YouTube during the week's scouring. Shortly before Google's hasty announcement, Eric Schmidt attempted to lower the industry's expectations, saying that a system that would identify copyrighted clips with 100% accuracy was impossible. He suggested that reaching a target of 80% or 90% accuracy would be the best that could be hoped for. Google claimed that its software could accurately detect an exact copy of a long clip that had not been altered. But an algorithm for matching could be thrown off by changes to the copy. The shorter the clip, the greater the difficulty in detecting a match. Even if a clip could be identified, the software could not make judgments about whether the clip was being used in a way that would fall under what copyright permitted as fair use. Google's software required the active cooperation of the entire entertainment industry. It was designed to compare YouTube clips with a master library of all television shows and films, which Google announced it would set up and maintain on its own servers. In order for owners of copyrighted material to be able to enjoy protection, however, they had to supply Google with a copy of all works for which protection was sought. For large media companies, with deep vaults filled with programs, the requirement meant placing its most precious intellectual property into the care of Google, and by doing so, setting a precedent that would then require that they do the same thing, turning over digital copies of their entire libraries, again and again, to every website that hosted videos. In its haste to announce the availability of the new tool, Google could claim only that Walt Disney, Time Warner, and CBS were experimenting with technology, but tellingly, none of the three was willing to state its willingness to turn over all of their content to Google. A more practical alternative would be the creation of an independent video repository to be used by all video websites, not just Google, for checking copyright status. Like most young, precociously successful companies, Google had grown too fast to bother learning how to cooperate with competitors on matters of industry-wide concern. When Google undertook book scanning, it had simply ignored the pleas of others to join with partners to create a centralized repository. With video, Google proposed to create, once again, its own storehouse, but its plan imposed prohibitive costs and risks upon the prospective content providers. For all of the progress that had been made in pattern recognition work in computer science, computers simply were not yet smart enough to screen video content for potential problems. YouTube was able to identify pornography and graphic violence not because it relied on sophisticated algorithms, but because it used the unpaid labor of volunteers. Its users were invited to flag videos, alerting YouTube to clips that contained sexual or violent content. Once altered, YouTube would confirm the problem and then remove the video. As YouTube co-founder Steve Chen gratefully said, "Nothing beats our community flagging." That method could not be used, however, for policing copyright problems. We all know pornography and violence when we see them, but copyright status can only be determined by the copyright holder. Chen, however, was conveniently ignoring the presence of entire categories of material found on YouTube, beginning with thousands of clips of The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, whose use was notoriously unauthorized and impossible to miss. YouTube could have adopted other means of screening for copyright problems, approaches that were labor-intensive and expensive, at least compared to free. YouTube competitor Rever was paying humans to check every single video upload for infringement, as well as for pornography and hate speech. For its punctiliousness, Rever was rewarded with obscurity in the marketplace. Carefree YouTube, meanwhile, continued to grow faster than any other online video site. By March 2008, Google YouTube's share of online video watching was 38%, almost 10 times the 4% share of second-place Fox Interactive. Rever had such a small share of video viewing that it lacked sufficient share to make the list of top 10 video sites. In April 2008, 1 year after Schmidt's appearance at the National Association of Broadcasters meeting at which he had announced Google's video filtering service, it was impossible for neutral observers to notice a drop in the number of unauthorized clips from television shows and series. One could find, for example, scenes from every one of the last 5 movies that received the Academy Award for Best Picture. The 10-minute limit on clips prevented one from viewing a full-length feature film such as The Departed, but the entire movie was available to anyone willing to watch it in 12 10-minute clips. When asked about the ongoing problems, Google always politely avowed its concern for copyright protection, but in practice, the company did not seem much concerned. The Viacom lawsuit moved slowly and seemed so remote as not to even register as an irritant. In the meantime, YouTube continued to grow and grow. By spring 2008, 85 million U.S. viewers watched 4.3 billion videos on YouTube in a single month, about 50 per viewer, according to internet research firm Comscore. Even while online video viewing grew, YouTube continued to gain share of the overall video market, as video contributors sought the one place in which the largest possible audience could be reached. And the growth in the number of clips that were uploaded at YouTube brought still more viewers. How Google should go about converting those billions of videos shown each month into a profitable business line was a question it could not answer. But its core business, serving up advertisements based upon text, paid all tuition costs while the company learned about this and the other unfamiliar businesses it was entering. Conclusion. Google's ascendance has been accompanied by Microsoft's decline. No computer company has ever been able to enjoy preeminence that spans 2 successive technological eras. IBM in the mainframe era could not head off the ascent of Digital Equipment Corporation in the mini-computer era, which in turn could not head off the ascent of Microsoft in the personal computer era. Fully aware of this history, Bill Gates and his associates nonetheless hoped that by dint of unceasing vigilance and wise management, Microsoft would become the first to succeed in maintaining its position of leadership into whatever era would succeed the one defined by the PC. When the Internet spread from research labs and universities and seeped into the commercial world, the first challenger that gave Microsoft a fright was Netscape, which was undercapitalized and easily batted away. Subsequently, Google succeeded in pushing Microsoft into a defensive crouch. Google could easily have lost the opportunity for dominance to another company, one born earlier in the Internet era. Yahoo was a more likely candidate, having had a considerable head start in growth by the time Google was founded. By relying on a labor-intensive approach to organizing the web, though, Yahoo failed to keep up with the growth of the new medium and lost its early lead to the little company with which it had contracted to handle web search queries. Google was able to grow as fast as the web itself because it relied upon hardware and software technology that was designed to scale up fast and inexpensively. It was able to acquire a market capitalization that exceeded all other Internet companies because it chanced upon text ads linked to the keywords of a search phrase, ads that turned out to be a highly efficient means for advertisers to reach prospective buyers. By 2007, it was able to acquire sufficient stature to successfully launch 2 industry-wide coalitions, Open Social for social networks and the Open Handset Alliance for cell phones. Both initiatives, in their first 6 months, gathered many partners and seemed likely to dramatically reshape their respective industries. Considerable achievements all. Along the way, however, Google was unable to lay claim to attracting the largest number of U.S. visitors to its websites. In its early years, when it functioned only as a site that referred its users elsewhere, Google took pride in its ability to speedily direct its visitors to the best site on the web for whatever it was they were searching for. Later, As it added categories of information that it stored, it became a destination site itself. But in the meantime, Google's Internet predecessors, Yahoo, MSN, and AOL, had established comprehensive web portal offerings designed to supply many kinds of information. They had also developed enormously popular email services that long predated Gmail. Consequently, Google's competitors attracted more U.S. visitors to their sites in any given month than did Google. Yet in April 2008, Google passed a milestone in its history when the number of visitors to its U.S. sites exceeded that of all competitors. Among the overall U.S. Internet audience of 190.7 million unique visitors, that is, disregarding multiple visits to a site by one person, Google drew 141 million visitors, edging past Yahoo, Microsoft, and AOL. It attained the number one position partly due to an increase in the volume of search requests, but also partly due to the continuing rapid growth of traffic headed to YouTube. Converting that YouTube traffic into profits proved a problem resistant to solution. Even though by March 2008 YouTube was serving those 4.3 billion videos a month in the United States alone, Google had yet to report revenue of any material size from its operation. Google's other attempts to move beyond web search similarly lacked an appreciable return on investment, at least in the near term. Each continued to do well in acquiring content. Columbia University in December 2007 became the 28th library to join Google Book Search. A second dozen cities in February 2008 acquired Street Views in Google Maps. The New York Times in April 2008 added a new layer to Google Earth. Each contributed to the Google aura of commanding the best information, regardless of type. But none individually could be declared a clear financial success or failure for Google. Collectively, Google's multiplying services constitute a set of assets that no other Internet company has the means, strategical, technical, financial, to match. The intangible value to Google of having so many kinds of information under a single roof cannot be calculated precisely, but it's likely that all Google properties share a halo effect. Each appeals to more users simply because of its Google identity and the way the very multiplicity of services conveys authority. Visitors to one site are also more likely to use another Google site because of the irresistible convenience of staying within the Google family of services. Circumstantial evidence suggests that the non-web services have strengthened the Google brand for web search. Google's share of web searches in the United States increased to almost 68.3% in May 2008 from 58.3% in March 2006. During the same period, Microsoft's share dropped to 5.9% from 13.1%. The quality of Google web searches, compared with Microsoft searches, did not improve that dramatically. If anything, the qualitative gap narrowed. But Google has succeeded in strengthening the association in users' minds between web searchers and the Google brand, to the detriment of Microsoft, Yahoo, and its other search engine competitors. Eric Schmidt is fond of saying that Google users are merely one click away from leaving, as Google does not lock its users in. One click away may have applied in Google's early years, but as time has passed and Google has become a one-stop destination for information and a one-stop destination to some for software as a service, its users have made an investment in their Google accounts that cannot be abandoned casually with a click. All in all, Google has yet to stumble badly in undertaking new initiatives, but it has been mocked for failing to create a second profitable business in addition to search-related advertising. Microsoft's CEO, Steve Ballmer, likes to deride Google as a one-trick pony. Microsoft, he says, is a two-trick pony: software for desktop computing and software for servers. That is, trying to add a third and fourth trick to its repertoire. Ballmer hardly stands in a good position to criticize Google, however. Since becoming Microsoft's CEO in 2000, his company has continued to flounder in its efforts to build up its online services. In May 2008, the company's market capitalization remained $300 billion less than it had been when it reached its historic peak in 1999. The last year that its online services unit posted a profit was fiscal year 2005, and its online losses grew in each successive year, reaching $745 million in 2007. Losses in the first 3 quarters of 2008 indicated that the year's total will far surpass that suffered the year previously. Google has no such worries about mounting losses. It has managed to generously fund its various online experiments while at the same time posting ever-growing profits. Its fiscal year is slightly different from Microsoft's. But for rough comparison, place Microsoft's losses in its online services segment against Google's $1.5 billion in profits in fiscal year 2005, $3 billion in 2006, and $4.2 billion in 2007. Google's growth has been so remarkable that Henry Blodgett of Silicon Alley Insider predicted in May 2008 that by May of the following year, Google's search business will be both larger and more profitable than Microsoft Windows, which he described as the most profitable and legendary monopoly in history. Google's financial results have given its shareholders no reason to complain about imprudent outlays on YouTube or Google Book Search. In any case, Google's executive leadership does not have to contend with restive shareholders. The company has a dual-class voting structure. Brin, Page, and Schmidt control almost 40% of the voting power, which effectively gives these three control of the company. Public shareholders show no sign of dissatisfaction with the broadest possible interpretation of the company's mission to organize the world's information, nor with the speculative initiatives to expand beyond web search. Page gave due warning in 2004 about their intentions in the company prospectus on the eve of its IPO. In our opinion, he explained, outside pressures too often tempt companies to sacrifice long-term opportunities to meet quarterly market expectations. Google would pursue its long-term interests and would not shy away from high-risk, high-reward projects because of short-term earnings pressure. Anticipating that shareholders might become antsy if the company's bets do not quickly show a positive outcome, Page wrote, "We will have the fortitude to do this. We would request that our shareholders take the long-term view." The company's fortitude has not yet been put to a genuine test, in which its core advertising business encounters serious turbulence and slips, or one of its very big bets turns into a very big failure. If, under adverse circumstances, Google reaffirms its commitment to organizing the world's information and does not scale back its ambition, then it will pass another milestone. In 2005, when Google ran into legal difficulties by recording television programs for Google Video without obtaining the permission of television producers, when the Association of American University Presses had warned Google that its plan to digitize books would violate copyright law, and when Google was sued for Google News' unauthorized use of short excerpts from news articles and thumbnail-sized photographs, it seemed that Google's attempts to do more than search the web would be stymied on all sides. When Eric Schmidt was interviewed at what seemed to be a trying time for Google, he smoothly acknowledged the complications and conveyed the sense that Google was working hard with the aggrieved parties to resolve all outstanding issues. This was all predictably soothing. And then Schmidt said something that was rather surprising. He gave an estimate of how much time Google would need to organize all of the world's information. It will take, current estimate, 300 years. The combination of many centuries and crisp precision made the number seem whimsical, outlandishly distant. This is a company that likes not just to think big, but to think bigger than anyone else. 300 years was showing off, wasn't it? It turned out to be neither a joke nor a boast. It was merely a dispassionate calculation. The year before, Craig Silverstein, the company's director of technology, who had been the first employee hired by Brin and Page, also used 300 years as an estimate, in his case as the upper edge of a range of years, 200 to 300, that would be needed before an intelligent computer would be able to understand emotions and other non-factual information and be able to do as well as today's human reference librarians. In 2005, when Eric Schmidt referred to a 300-year timeline, he was speaking not about artificial intelligence in a search engine, but about the amount of time that would be required for his company to organize the world's information. He mentioned the 300 years a second time, a few months later, when addressing a convention of advertisers. In his talk, he explained that he spoke not as a person with a marketing background, but only as a computer scientist. He said that only about 2 or 3% of all information in the world that could be indexed and searched had been converted into a form that made indexing and searching possible. Predicting the progress of digitization was a matter of simple calculation. We did a math exercise, he explained, when asked to project how long it would take Google to fulfill the company's mission, and the answer was 300 years. Google's first 10 years of organizing the world's information has taken it a considerable distance. It may not need 290 years to complete its mission. This concludes the reading of Planet Google, One Company's Audacious Plan to Organize Everything We Know, by Randall Stross. Copyright 2008 by Randall Stross. This book was read by William Hughes. This unabridged recording was published by arrangement with Free Press, an imprint of Simon & Schuster, Incorporated, and was produced in 2008 by Blackstone Audio, Inc., which holds the copyright.